Hello, everybody. It's Peter McLaughlin with BlueSky Hypnosis. Welcome to Friday Live at 5. Glad you're joining. Today, we're going to be talking about releasing guilt through atonement. So, as I think most of us understand, guilt is a really, really powerful emotion, a powerful condition. It's debilitating. There are certain kinds of families, certain kinds of structures that emphasize guilt. And in my opinion, it's extremely destructive. And so we're talking about, today at least, what guilt is, how to release it, talking about atonement, talking about the difference between guilt and remorse, which I think is a really important distinction and important difference, how to move through when we've done wrong in a way that creates the most healing for us and for the person that we have wronged. Just a standard disclaimer, I'm not a psychologist, I am not a doctor. If you've got important issues, psychological issues, physical issues, you want to make sure you see your licensed professional. I'm not that person. I'm a hypnotist and a life coach. I've been doing this work for 16 years, and everything that I share with you, everything that I talk about, comes from this fairly long career right now of working with people on a variety of different issues, one-to-one, primarily using hypnosis, but also using neuro-linguistic programming, using pattern recognition, dream analysis, and then life coaching to help people get from where they've been, an unhappy place, to a new place where they have let go of the old things that have been holding them back. Make sure that if you have questions, if you have comments, that you put those in the chat bar. That's what makes the broadcast actually interesting for me, instead of just hearing myself talk. And it often takes us in directions that I would not have expected, which is super cool. I just think I have a green screen thing going here. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, I think that helps a little bit. All right, so yeah, make sure you place the comments that you have or questions that you have in the comments section, and I'll respond to those the best I can. And that takes the direction of the broadcast in these really interesting, down these interesting paths that, as I said, I would not have necessarily thought to talk about. So it's kind of why I come back and do this. So without further ado, why don't we start with talking about the difference between guilt and remorse? Because I think that this is really important in terms of a clue as to how we proceed with getting out of guilt. So guilt largely, they're very similar in terms of their definition, but in terms of the actual meaning, they're extremely different. So the first piece is guilt is an acknowledgement that you have done wrong, while remorse is actually an acknowledgement that you've done wrong, but having a regret for doing wrong. Now, the major distinction between these two words is that guilt, the focus with guilt, is largely upon the guilty party. So in other words, if I hurt someone, if I betrayed someone and I felt guilt, the focus would largely be upon me and the bad feelings I have inside of me for doing wrong to this other person. Whereas remorse, the focus is on the person that's been harmed. And if you think of causing an injury, let's just say for the sake of argument that the injury that we caused is a sort of a physical injury. And guilt might cause the person that created the injury to melt down in their own bad feelings of this injury that they caused the other person. Whereas remorse, in terms of the differences between these two, might cause that person to recognize the harm that they created and run inside and get an ice pack and put the ice pack on the contusion, or run inside and get some antiseptic and get some bandages and try to heal that wound that they caused. This is very, very important, because I think when you define these words this way, guilt is egocentric. You know, if I cause harm to you and I place the focus on me, I'm not really moving toward a solution, if you will, moving towards something that actually makes the situation better. I'm just getting inside of my own shell. Whereas remorse causes me to have the feeling of, oh my gosh, I did this damage. What can I do to help repair the damage? So hopefully that makes sense. Now, how does guilt affect your life? It's the other thing that I wrote down on the promo for this live. In my experience, the way I look at this is that if a person walks around carrying guilt, they're driving their own vibrational levels down, right? They're not in a state of joy. They're not in a state where they can bring the best of them out into the world. In a way, they're bringing a much lesser version of them out into the world because they're carrying on to this heaviness of guilt. Carrying on? They're holding on to this heaviness of guilt. And with the people with whom I've worked, there are some people, and you guys can probably relate to this, some of you I'm sure, that you're still carrying guilt from something that you did or didn't do 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And what good does that really bring to the world for you to be carrying around this heaviness of guilt so many years later after the fact? Doesn't it make sense that you would seek to repair whatever damage you made and then ask to be forgiven and then forgive yourself, vibrate at a higher level, and bring more of what you have to offer to this desperately needy world? I mean, we don't need more people walking around in a state of heaviness. We need more people walking around in a state of lightness. The other thing is that I think when you're carrying guilt, your proclivity to project that guilt out onto others goes up because you're living in that state. You know, if you're living in a state of filth, you're more likely to walk around dirty. And when you sit on somebody's white couch, to make that couch dirty. Isn't it better if you're living in if you find yourself living in filth, that you clean up the mess to the extent that you can, that you don't dwell in it anymore? And I guess maybe that's the other way of thinking about guilt, is that it's a negative emotion that people tend to dwell inside of, sometimes indefinitely. Whereas remorse is a state of acknowledgement that the harm that you have caused, and a sincere desire, by focusing on the person who's been harmed, of doing whatever you can do to help that person, and then either be forgiven and or, for sure, forgiving yourself. Because let's face it, sometimes another person is not in a state where they are prepared to forgive you for whatever it was that you did. But I think with the difference between guilt and remorse, there's no obligation that you have to remain in that awful feeling state for the rest of your life. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, there are people who commit murders who oftentimes don't even serve a full life sentence. You know, they might be in prison for, depending on the country, they could be in prison for 20 years or 40 years, but at some point, even they oftentimes are released from the debt that they pay back to society. Why should anyone be in this state of guilt indefinitely, especially when guilt is that self-focused state? All right, let's see who hits here, and if there are any questions. So 123 opera singer is saying, I'm carrying his guilt. So I think I know what you mean by that. Because you say down here, how do you let go of guilt that is not my own, but that is his? So can you let me know, who do you mean by his? That would be very helpful, and I'd love to answer your question. So if you could just type in and let me know, who do you mean by, who is his in this context? Who is his guilt? Here is Tracy Maysmith says, hi, I recently took a significant step in self-forgiveness, so perfect timing. Well, great. I'm glad you are here. And if you want to elaborate on that, feel free to do so. Sydney Morales, good to see you, Sydney. Hello. Here is Mama's Healthy Adventures. Hello. Hi, Peter. This is definitely huge. I have had a shift in my mindset regarding this since our last session. Thank you. Hope you were well. Yeah, I hope you're well too, and I'd love to hear more about that at some point. Here is Timmy Lee. Great topic. Thank you for that. And okay. So here's 123 opera singer saying her rapist. All right. So she said I'm carrying his guilt. All right. Does that? I hate to ask you too many questions here, but I really want to understand this so that I can give you the best answer I can possibly give you. So, when you say carrying, did you become pregnant in this horrible event? If not, can you tell me more about why you're carrying his guilt? I'd love to hear more about that. So it looks like you're. So says thanks. All right. Yeah. If you can elaborate just a little bit more, that will really help, because, as I said, if it's not carrying his child, which maybe could be a manifestation of guilt that he has, but why would you be carrying his guilt? And I'm not saying there's no reason for that. I just would really like to know, because then I think I can help you answer that question that you asked. So thank you. Okay, all right, so got it. You're saying, yes, he made me pregnant, but I froze, so I felt dirty. Okay, are you saying that freezing, do you feel guilty because you didn't fight back, because you didn't run away? Is that what you mean by freezing? Did you carry the child to term? Did you have an abortion? Is the guilt wrapped up somehow in the pregnancy? Is the guilt wrapped up in your reaction to the assault? And again, I'm so sorry to be asking all these questions, but I kind of need that to answer your question, which is an awesome, important question about how do you release this guilt. All right, let's see what we have here. So let's see. You said yes again. So maybe that's the freezing question that I asked. And then there was a miscarriage at 6 weeks. Okay, so let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you feel a sense of guilt because you froze. All right. So first of all, I think it's really important to put everything into context. It's not fair to hold yourself to a higher standard than the vast majority of all human beings. The first thing that we do when we're in a state of shock, like if there's a gunshot, it's not fight or flight. There's a step before that. The step before that is freeze. Freeze, then fight or flight. And I can tell you, as somebody who was a first responder for many years, that even trained firefighters, trained police officers, trained soldiers still have the freeze response. That's the first thing that a human being does. That's how we're wired. That's our neurology. The next thing that we do is we do what we did in the next situation in our past that is that's the closest to what's happening in the moment. This is where training comes in. So I was trained as a firefighter, and the reason we would go through so much training is because you encounter really scary situations, really alarming, shocking situations, some of which can create PTSD. And if you have training, you're more likely to follow the path of the training based upon what's happening there right in front of you. If you don't have any training, the next thing that you're likely to follow is an authoritative command. So I can only imagine what a horrendous, terrifying, shocking situation it is to be assaulted and attacked like that. And if you're a female and you're attacked by a male, generally speaking, you're at a major disadvantage due to size and height and strength and the maybe it was surprise, maybe who knows, maybe there was alcohol involved, I don't know. But I think the important thing to start with is to put everything into context. You know, you are a member of the human family, and none of us is perfect in all situations and at all times, especially when we are heavily stressed by a shocking and a violent situation. You know, the first imperative is to survive. And my guess is that you did in that moment, you know, and the other thing to think about too is that you're working with your lizard brain, which is only concerned with your survival. What's going to help you survive? And maybe freezing actually helped you to survive. We don't know this. We don't know that if you had run away, if he would have caught you. We don't know that if you had fought back, he wouldn't have killed you or hurt you to a greater degree. You know, one of the ways of putting something into context is to say, if this same incident had happened to your best friend, would you be thinking that your best friend should be walking around with a lifetime of guilt? Would you condemn her for responding in the exact same way that you did? Now, the answer to that question is probably no. That's my guess. But, you know, it could be yes, but it's probably no. And if it's no, then it's time to hold yourself to a reasonable standard, not to the standard of, you know, like, I'm a trained police officer and I've gone through this kind of training many times and it happened to me twice before and now I respond in this trained fashion. So that's the first thing. The first thing is to put this all into context. And as I say, one of the best ways of doing that is to pretend in your mind that this happened to your best friend or this happened to a hypothetical daughter. And would you condemn them for behaving, for responding in the same way in which you responded? That's the first thing. The second thing is, and this all happens inside of our consciousness, right? I'm not saying that forgiveness never happens physically, face to face. Of course it does. But the first place that it has to happen is it has to happen inside of our consciousness. And if I were working with you one-on-one, I would want to understand other elements. I would want to understand other things that are going on. I would want to put you in touch with your spiritual guidance. So you could think of this being as a spirit guide. Now, for a person of faith, that could be an ascended master. Like for a Christian, it could be Jesus, or it could be Mother Mary. For others, it could be Buddha, it could be Kuan Yin, it could be an angel. But to put you in your consciousness, in hypnosis, in touch with your spiritual guidance, to help you understand the larger context of this heinous attack. When something horrible happens, we generally ask the question, why? Why did this happen? But in general, we never receive an answer. And I think it's important that we do receive answers about why something horrible happened. Because when we can understand the larger context of something, it's much easier to have compassion for ourselves and for others. And I'm not saying in any shape or form that what happened to you is excusable. It's not. You know, on a human level, it's an absolutely heinous act. It's one of the worst things that can happen, I think. And, you know, a person, I think, is justified, that's my personal feeling, in defending themselves if they have the means to do that. But in a spiritual sense, understanding the larger context can also lead us to the place of forgiveness. And forgiveness isn't just for the person who assaulted us. The forgiveness often is for ourselves, and it sounds like that's exactly where you are. And so the two things that I would suggest right off the bat is put this into context. Would you be condemning your best friend or a hypothetical daughter if the same thing happened to her? You probably wouldn't. Don't hold yourself to a higher standard than you would hold your best friend to. And then the second thing is to go inside, is to meet with your spiritual guidance and And number one, offload the pain. So there's physical pain, and then there's emotional pain, and then there's psychic pain. There can also be spiritual pain. In a state of hypnosis, when you're with your sort of trusted spiritual guides, you can release that pain, which is essentially energetic pain that we hold in our bodies. And when you release that pain, it becomes easier to forgive others, to forgive yourself. When you understand the larger context, the spiritual context in which all of this is happening, it's easier to forgive. And I'm not saying that this is easy. And I hope that you have been getting psychological counseling, that you've been working with a psychologist. Hopefully the psychologist that specializes in this. This kind of work can also help you. And I wouldn't say that you should just do this and not that. I think firing on all cylinders can really help. And I have definitely worked with women in the past who have been raped. It's a horribly traumatic experience, but so are many of the other things that I work with. So, if there's anything that I can, sort of guide you towards or help you with offline, I will certainly do that. I have a track on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, BlueSky Hypnosis, for releasing guilt. I think that could really help you. Depending on how long ago this occurred, we could also work on healing your younger self. So let's say that this happened 5 years ago, 6 years ago. You can, in your consciousness, you can bring your younger self into the picture. And your present self, at your present age, can serve as kind of a helper or as a healer for your younger self, right? You can even thank your younger self for surviving the assault. Because if she hadn't survived the assault, hypothetically 6 years ago, you wouldn't be here today. And when this older version of you can, in your consciousness, thank the younger version of you for surviving, when you can tell her you're actually proud of her for making it through this terribly difficult situation, this shocking and terrifying situation, this can also change what's going on in your deeper mind and make it much easier for you to step out of the guilt that you probably never should have been in the first place, and move into a different setting or a different place. So looks like you have another comment down here. I just want to jump on that one. It says, thank you so much. My guardian angel and my daughter, who I lost, have the same name, Sophia. So, oh wow. Okay. So you are of course welcome. And I hope something that I said will bring you some degree of relief and perhaps give you an idea of the path forward. Because I can't, and I'm sure everyone else on this broadcast would probably agree with me, that we cannot see you taking on any guilt for this, for what happened. And I'm sure we all want you to be free of that and to be able to rise up to your highest level of your radiant being, of your radiant self, so that you can bring whatever gifts that you have to the rest of us, because this world needs them. All right, there was one other comment you have, which is, oh, wow, yes, okay, cool. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure that this is not easy for you, and yet I believe that there could be someone else on this call that might be in a similar situation or circumstance, or know someone who's in a similar situation or circumstance, or someone who watches this broadcast later, and you may have helped to rescue someone else. So please keep everything I said today in mind. If there's anything that I can do for you, just let me know. Okay, thank you. Go back up here. Let's see. There's Waffle Queen. Hello to you. And Miriam. Hi, Peter. Great to see you. Great to see you too, Miriam. Happy Friday to all. And let's see here. Here is guilt. I carry the heavy burden of being away from my dad during his illness. I was struggling back then was my low self-esteem and frustrations and couldn't handle seeing him in pain. Okay, so I'm sure that this is, this feels, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but I'm guessing that this feels like something that you can't fix, because I think you said during his illness. Oh, it doesn't say that he has passed. I think I was assuming that he passed away, but maybe he didn't. Maybe he's still alive. But for some people, I think they feel like there's nothing they can do, that the time has passed, and that they just have to somehow live the rest of their life carrying this heavy burden. And this is where, again, that difference between guilt and remorse comes in, where remorse, guilt focuses on the guilty party, and they could carry it for the rest of their lives. And remorse focuses on the person that they believe was harmed or injured. And it seeks to make amends, to try to resolve whatever happened to the extent that they can. And I don't know if your father's still alive or if he's deceased, but I can basically pivot from what you said into the process of healing the guilt. And that is, you can meet with your father in your consciousness. So there's two parts of a human being. There's our physical bodies, and there is our soul or our spirit. This is the energetic essence of who we are. The body can die, but the spirit or the soul cannot. And this is why reincarnation is a thing, because the body goes away, the spirit or the soul travels to wherever it travels. You could call it heaven or Valhalla or Eden or the life between lives or the afterlife. And then that same spirit or soul incarnates into another body, and it brings its learnings and its pain and all sorts of things with it. So when your father, let's just say for the sake of our argument that your father passed away, hopefully he didn't, but if your father passed away, it's only his body that passed away. And you can meet with his soul or his spirit in your consciousness. And you can make amends with this person in your consciousness, whether they still are physically living in a body or they are now deceased and no longer have a body. You don't actually have to call him up on the phone. You don't have to go over to his house. It's essentially like his spirit meeting with your spirit in the quantum field. And in this place, you can say, Dad, I'm sorry that I wasn't there when you were sick. I couldn't handle your pain. It was too painful for me to be there, and I feel remorse rather than guilt. I feel remorse that I wasn't there, that I wasn't strong enough, that I wasn't aware enough to be present for you, and I'm sorry. And 99 times out of 100, his spirit is going to say to you, you don't have to feel that guilt. I wouldn't have wanted you there to see me in all that pain. Or I understand why you felt like you couldn't be there, and I know that you love me, and I love you, and I want you to let go of that guilt. I want you to let go of that, whatever it is that you've been carrying. And at that moment in your consciousness, you can actually release the pain, the weight of that guilt. You can give that guilt to a religious figure in your mind, in your consciousness. You can give that guilt to your spirit guide. You can put the guilt or the shame into a fire, like a campfire that's going on in your mind. And the important thing to remember about how your mind works is that your subconscious mind cannot discern. It cannot tell the difference between something that your conscious mind says is fact and something that your conscious mind says is fiction. It doesn't know the difference. So this concept of carrying around an emotional burden, an energetic burden, is real, and it can affect your physical health. So offloading that energetic burden also can affect and improve your health in this it starts with the non-physical, but then it translates into the physical. You know, if you're stressed out, it's going to create physical changes in your body. You know, your heartbeat's going to become elevated. the arteries and the veins in your vascular system are going to constrict. You're going to dump adrenaline and cortisol into your bloodstream. Your thinking is going to go from your prefrontal cortex to your lizard brain that just is concerned with survival. You're going to diminish your immune system, your reproductive system, your endocrine system, and your digestive system. All of those things are going to be halved and held over a long period of time. This is going to cause chaos inside of your body, all from an energetic component. So it's vital that you figure out what it is you're carrying around. In this case, we're talking about guilt today. And that you find your way towards self-forgiveness, towards releasing it. Because here's the thing. If you apologize to another person and you are sincerely remorseful for what you've done, and you have recognized the error of your ways, and you've made a commitment to yourself and maybe to the universe or to God that you're not going to do it again, then you are in a position to forgive yourself, in my opinion. You don't need the participation of the wounded party in order to fully forgive yourself. It doesn't make sense to me that the creator would come up with a system that means that you cannot right a wrong, that you have to remain for all eternity in a place of pain and sadness and guilt. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And what I've seen with my clients over and over again is that no matter what it is, that they can find their way back to grace. And my definition of grace is forgiveness all around. So that if you've been harmed, you forgive the perpetrator, you forgive yourself, and you maybe forgive the person that didn't protect you. And everybody participates in the forgiveness, and everybody in a sense rises up. The other metaphor that I've used is like if you were handcuffed to somebody and you conceived of those handcuffs as handcuffs of pain. When you release yourself from the pain, you also release the other person. And I think this is the point. The point is for us all to leave the lower levels of vibration, of pain and suffering, because pain just begets more pain, and to rise up into a place of compassion, forgiveness, love, and grace. Okay, let's see what else we have here. There's Kristen Hubbard. Hey, Kristen, good to see you. Welcome. Here is Bertha Bai. For me, the feeling of guilt and shame after being raped was likely the fact that apparently I wasn't worth more. Okay, I'm sorry about that. And what I would like to say is that as human beings, our mind is designed to create meaning out of anything. So that meaning that we create out of an incident or an event is governed by what I would call it it has to pass through, the event has to pass through a prism in our mind of all of our beliefs, of everything that we've ever experienced in the past. And based upon all of those beliefs, we then come up with a meaning. And this is why you can have 10 people witness a car accident and you can have 10 different stories about what happened. Because it's passing through the filters of 10 different people. And each filter is its own unique, complex filter based entirely on that individual, entirely on that person. So let me just put your comment up here again. So the meaning that you took from being raped was that you weren't worth more. that this could only happen to a person who has low value. And I think it might be possible to understand, at least conceptually, that this kind of heinous, violent, condemnable act can occur to all kinds of people, And I would bring you back to what I said to 123 opera singer, which is the mental test of imagining that the exact same thing happened to your very best friend, or the exact same thing happened to your daughter or to a hypothetical daughter. Would you come to the conclusion that this happened to them because they're worthless, or they have very low worth? Chances are probably pretty good, without knowing you, that you would not apply the same standard to someone else that you apply to yourself. And therefore, if what I'm saying is true, therefore, it is important to find where this notion of low self-worth was created within you. Was it created by this attack? Or did it exist beforehand? Because that belief is based on a trauma. And the belief is an illusion. Because there's no human being that is better than any other human being. And there is no human being that is worse than any other human being. We are all of us, children of God. We are all magnificent. That it gets distorted, it gets twisted by pain. And pain begets more pain. This idea that we keep being sold that war is going to solve violence is literally insane. It's like saying filth is going to solve filth. So if I have a dirty apartment, all I have to do is just bring in a bunch of garbage and it's going to fix it. How would that possibly make any sense? Or that if it were too loud somewhere and I wanted it to be quiet, I'd solve it by bringing in more noise. It doesn't make any sense. So if no human being wants to be in pain. How does bringing more pain into a situation get us any closer to our goal? I really do believe in the maxim that hurt people hurt. And this isn't to excuse the behavior of people that are committing violent acts. I think they should be held accountable for their actions. But I think we should fixate less, perhaps, on punishment and more on rehabilitation. Yes, a person should be out of circulation so they can't do the same thing to other people. But perhaps while they're out of circulation, we could be fixating more on what kind of pain does a person have to be in to commit this kind of an act? And what, if any, what could we do as a society to help that person get out of pain so that when they're released back into the population after whatever sentence is appropriate for them, they're not going to just go back and do the same thing. And I know that we use terms like a correctional institution. We talk about rehabilitation, but I think we do a piss poor job at that sort of thing. And I remember seeing a documentary about prisoners in Norway and how they're treated with respect and how they learn how to do things while they're in jail, and they live in situations and circumstances that don't look like a cage. It looks more like kind of an apartment. And they were talking about the rates of recidivism being much, much lower than they are in the United States. And I just think there's probably something to this. So, consider where your interpretation came from. Did it come from the pain of this assault? Or did it come from earlier pain? And that's what your mind is making up. Your mind is making up this could only happen to someone of low self-value or low self-worth. Put yourself through the same test that I suggested 1, 2, 3 opera singer go through, and that is, if this happened to your very best friend, or if it happened to your daughter, would you come to the same conclusion that of course this would happen because they have low self-value? They're worthless people. I don't think you would. So my plea to you would be to find that inner magnificence. One of the resources on my channel that you could use is, I've got 2 different tracks. One's audible, one's subliminal, about I am worthy of love. Reconnect with that part of you that is worthy of love. Reconnect with that part of you that is pure. That part of you that is already magnificent. If I were working with you, I would want to, we would build up to it, but I would want your present day self to encounter the younger version of you who was attacked, and to thank her for surviving it. Because her survival means you're still alive. And you still being alive gives you an opportunity to bring your magnificence into the world, to be of service to other people. So thank you for sharing this. And if you want to make any more comments, I'd be happy to follow up. If anything I said, didn't make any sense, or if there's something that I missed, I'd be happy to come back into this. But thank you for sharing. I really, really appreciate it. I know it takes a lot of courage to do that. Let's see here. Tracy Maysmith. Hello, Tracy. Guilt was part of my upbringing, a way to make me and my sisters be good. I learned guilt kind of as a way of life. I was recently introduced to the idea of guilt being a habit. Oh, very cool. She follows up by saying, then also introduced to the idea that self-forgiveness is the most unselfish thing I can do. Yes. This takes the issue of not being worthy of self-forgiveness off the table. Absolutely. I could not agree more. When you're in that state of guilt, and definitely there are certain subcultures that seem to promote this. They talk about a Catholic guilt, and I feel like I was raised with some of that. Jewish people talk about a Jewish guilt. There are certain families that wield guilt like a cudgel to control people. And I think recognizing that and refusing to be controlled through the mechanism of guilt, refusing to be a match for it, is very important. While at the same time, being willing to take on responsibility for where we have failed, because every one of us fails. Every one of us makes mistakes. Sometimes we do things knowingly, but oftentimes we do things unknowingly. And being willing to recognize it and here's the word that I used in the promo, to atone for it. What does atonement mean? It means to make amends or reparation for a wrong. So it's an active process. It's doing what you can to make a wrong right. It also means, atonement also means a reconciliation with God. So for Bertha, who talked about this could only happen to someone of low self-worth. It could only happen to someone of low value. It could only happen to a quote unquote worthless person. I think, in a way, connotes a separation, a schism from God. Because if you're connected to God, I think you understand your own magnificence, right? You understand the magnificence of all people. And so to take on this belief that you're worthless, I say, creates this disconnect from your source. So perhaps that word atonement, which means a reconciliation, a reconnection to God, actually sets the stage for you to forgive yourself for not being perfect, to forgive yourself, as crazy as that sounds to an outsider like me, for being attacked, when the responsibility isn't the responsibility on the attacker. Perhaps it sets the condition whereby you can forgive the attacker, which in your deeper mind lets your deeper mind know, oh, we weren't responsible for that. Fine. All of us are going to be responsible for some things, but we certainly don't have to take responsibility for things that we're not responsible for. And if we can learn to forgive ourselves, we can learn to forgive others. If we can learn to forgive others, we can forgive ourselves. So back to Tracy. Tracy was saying that guilt was part of her upbringing, and it was a way of her parents being able to control the kids. And that self-forgiveness is the most unselfish thing that you can do. Absolutely. And this gets back to the definition about guilt in the first place versus remorse. Remember what I said, which is guilt is, the focus of guilt is on us. It's on the guilty party, or the party that we conceive as being guilty. And there's really no endpoint to it for many people. Once you've done this horrible thing, well, that's it. You now are condemned to a lifetime, if not longer, of being in this low state. And you get to feel really bad about yourself every time this idea comes into your mind. Whereas remorse, the focus of remorse is on the person who's been harmed. What can I do to help the person who has been harmed? How can I make amends? How can I atone for what I did and then move on from it? Because if I stay in this self-focused place of guilt indefinitely, that is a kind of selfish place, is it not? Do I not now rob my family and my community and the world of the positive gifts that I have to offer if I'm always in this low state? And if hurt people hurt, maybe I'm going to inadvertently hurt more people. Maybe I'm going to develop some kind of an addiction and other people are going to have to take care of me. This makes so much sense to me, Tracy. Thank you for raising this. That in your experience, guilt was used to control other people. That's not okay. And that guilt is kind of a selfish place relative to remorse. So I feel like if nothing else comes out of today, I would be over the moon thrilled if one person walks away from this going, that makes a lot of sense. I think I want to apply the paradigm of remorse rather than applying the paradigm of guilt to myself. So if your parents say, well, you never come and visit me and this is blah, 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 blah. Great. Think about what they said, but put it through the filter of remorse. Should I have done something different here? Should I have quit my job so that I could spend every day, all day with my elderly parent? Should I have, fill in the blank? And if the answer is yes, then walk down the road of fixing it, of atonement. And even if the person's deceased, you can still in your consciousness bring them into your consciousness along with your spirit guide, and you can apologize to them. You can say, I'm so sorry that I did what I did, or I'm so sorry that I didn't do what I think I should have done. And receive their forgiveness, and then forgive yourself. And if they refuse to forgive you, you can still forgive yourself because you have acknowledged the wrong. You've made a commitment that you're not going to do that again. That's what it's supposed to be about. So thank you so much, Tracy. Really appreciate that. Okay, how are we doing here for time? We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to just talk briefly about next week. Let's see, where is that? I just got to put on these glasses. Next, there we go. Okay, so next week is kind of pivoting off of this week, and I'm calling it resolve emotional pain to lose weight. So remember what I talked about earlier today about how something like guilt becomes an energetic burden that we carry inside our body. And it influences how we think about things. So in my experience, people who have gained weight and they can't seem to lose it, almost always are carrying around heavy emotional burdens. Guilt could be one of them. So I'm talking about resolving emotional pain to lose weight. So guilt, shame, regret, these kinds of things, other kinds of emotional pain, like the assaults that 123 opera singer suffered and Bertha suffered. These and whatever shoots off them can be this kind of emotional heaviness. Well, it's definitely emotional heaviness that can then translate into physical heaviness. And people are not necessarily connecting the two. In my opinion, in order to be radiantly healthy, which is our birthright, by the way, we have to be healthy across the board, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. Like, we can't eat crap food and have the other parts doing well and not expect that it's going to affect us. We can't eat really good food and exercise, but we're carrying around the burdens of shame and guilt and expect that it's not going to affect us physically. So next week, we're going to be talking about that. All right, let's see if we've got a couple more questions here. Here is Kristen. Kristen says, I've been feeling guilty about myself for a long time now. One of the guilts was leaving our dog inside a building a long time ago. The building was locked from the inside, and I couldn't get Melody, and I think Melody is the name of the dog. So Kristen, the same thing can be done. The same thing can be done in your consciousness. You can have Melody come to you in your consciousness, and you can apologize to her. You can say, I'm so sorry that I left you in that locked building. I feel a deep sense of remorse for doing this. And I know that based upon that experience, I have a greater sensitivity towards animals and maybe even people. And maybe that situation has taught me something that I averted, an even worse situation in the future. But you can apologize, you can make amends, you can atone to this animal in your consciousness. And if the animal's passed on, it doesn't matter, because the animal's spirit, the animal's consciousness doesn't die any more than a human being's spirit or soul dies. It's eternal. And I do have a track on my YouTube channel, BlueSky Hypnosis, subscribe if you haven't, that's about grief regarding the loss of a pet, regarding the loss of an animal. And I think if you did that track, it would take you right through the atonement process for Melody. So good luck with that, and thank you for sharing. All right. Let's see here. Here's Medlenka. Hello, Medlenka. Good to see you. Hello, all. Great to be here after a long time. Holding a guilt from my past inside me feels like getting covered in mud over and over again and feeling the dirt on my body. It's time to stop. And then she goes on to say, so forgiving myself could be like taking a shower, cleaning myself up and giving myself a second chance to walk freely in the world again. Absolutely. And this is grace. That all cars, all automobiles are equipped with a gear called reverse. If they weren't, if cars could only go forward and they had no reverse, you could imagine that you could kind of get by with really good planning for a while, until sooner or later you get yourself down a one-way street, and the only way out, you can't turn around, it's too tight, the only way out is to back out. That is the equivalent of forgiveness. So what human being doesn't do something at some point that gets us covered in the proverbial dirt that you're talking about? Every one of us does, but we're taught to hide it. And then just hide it and carry around that guilt and shame with us indefinitely. Well, this is crap, because you're right. There is a mechanism, there is a reverse on this automobile, on this being, on this entity. And it's for all of us. And we have to use that gear to get ourselves out of these jams, because if we don't, we move into this selfish place of focusing on our guilt. Hurt people hurt, so we're likely to create more chaos out in the world. And we can't bring our gifts into the world. And I wrote a poem in the last couple of weeks that touches on this subject. And it has to do with love, and I'll send it out as an email to everybody if you're on my email list, and maybe I'll post it on this description of this video. I'll put it right in the description after this is over if you want to read it, and I'll send it out as an email. And it has to do with love and how we hide parts of ourselves because we're afraid if the world knew these things about us that we wouldn't be loved. And so we suppress this part of us. We present just part of us as a face to the world, which is a partial face to the world. And we hope for the best. And the question I ask myself is, if I love someone, is it really love if I only love part of them? If I sort of pick and choose and I only love part of them, isn't love more like loving all of them? Even the parts that might be ugly, even the parts that I don't like, even the parts that I might find threatening? And isn't that how I want to be loved? Don't I want to be loved for all of me, not just for the part of me that I feel safe showing to the world? And I think that this is a really important concept to get our arms around. You know, do you love all of you, or do you only love part of you? You know, and for 123 opera singer, and for Bertha, and for the rest of us, there's shit from our past that we're not proud of, and there's stuff from the past of our significant others and our lovers and our children and our parents and our friends. And isn't it something worth striving for to love all of them so that around us they feel free? Isn't it worth striving for to love all of us? To not reject parts of us? To not hide parts of us? Yeah, to engage in remorse and in the healing aspects of that. Like what can I do now that might make that better? And that even if the person is deceased, I meet with them in my consciousness and I apologize profusely to them for something that I recognize now was harm to them, and that I regret it, and my intention is to never do that again to anyone else. Isn't that worth striving for? So I guess I want to leave you with that, with that thought. And as I said, right after we conclude this broadcast today, I'm going to go into the description of this live, and I'm going to post that poem in there, and then I'm going to put it in an email that I will send out probably by tomorrow. That'll announce, formally announce next Friday's live, this one on resolving emotional pain to lose weight. And I'd love you guys to just, read the poem if you're so inspired, and further, if you have any thoughts on it, I would love to hear those thoughts, because nothing has happened to me in my life in the last 2 years, at least, that feels as important as this. And I'd love to get your thoughts on it. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and for making your comments. I'd especially like to call out 123 opera singer and Bertha for sharing such painful aspects of your respective pasts, and for helping me to understand even deeper this concept of loving all of you, for you to be able to love all of you, and maybe for everyone on this broadcast, to be able to love all of you, even the parts that you consider shameful, the parts that you hide from the world. And then, once we take on that, can we not then move into the next step, which is to love the people in our life that we say all the time, I love you, I love you, I love you. But do we really? Do we love all of them? Do they know that? Do they know that we love the parts of them that they're hiding from the world? So, thank you again. And I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your Friday evening, wherever in the world you are, and that you have a wonderful weekend. And really look forward to next Friday, live at 5, where we're going to be working on resolving emotional pain to lose weight. So take care. Thanks again. Bye.